Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So we're breaking down the Monday Night Football Showdown slate for tonight on Draftkings. We have the Rams versus the Bears. And this game has a tough act to follow with what we saw on Sunday Night Football. That game was absolutely superb. A lot of points were scored. We had some elite fantasy performances from guys like Tyler Lockett and Kyler Murray. We had a come from behind victory. It was back and forth for the most part. We had overtime, and everyone loves overtime, especially in those primetime games. We saw some missed field goals. We saw a game-winning field goal. It was an absolutely awesome game. A lot of cool things happened. And in this one, I don't expect as much of an exhilarating performance. Only a 45-point over-under here. We have the Rams versus the Bears, which aren't two teams that really get you too excited, but it's still Monday Night Football nonetheless, so we're going to be excited for it. Also, if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like on the video, and if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate it. And without further ado, let's dive right into it. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. And I'm just going to let you guys know right now, if this was a main slate, I would have absolutely zero interest in either of these quarterbacks. But since this is a showdown slate, I'm going to have some interest here. These guys offer us the highest floors because they got the ball in their hands each and every single play. Are they a bit pricey? Yes, but I do think they're fine flex spot plays. Could you play someone like Jared Goff in the captain spot? You could, but that's a lot of salary. I'm not sure if you can fit that in and also play guys like Allen Robinson, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, David Montgomery all in the same lineup, or Nick Foles as well. By putting one of these guys in the captain spot, you might have to use a cheaper option to be able to get that done. So maybe not a big fan of them in the captain, but definitely will have interest in both of these guys in the flex spot. But let's start up top with Jared Goff at $10,400. He's the more expensive of the two, and they also have the higher implied team total here at 25.5, and they're 6-point favorites at home. Now, this matchup versus Chicago is pretty rough. They have been very, very stingy versus opposing quarterbacks this season. And if you're looking at their numbers so far, second DVOA versus the pass, which is very good, and only allowing 12.7 DraftKings points per game to the position, which is fewest in the entire league. Only 240 passing yards per game, and not even a passing touchdown per game as well. And Jared Goff's numbers this season, I wouldn't say they've been great. Only 260 passing yards per game, and about 1.5 passing touchdowns, and only 31 pass attempts per game as well, so not a ton of volume either. The yards per attempt of 8.3 is not that bad, and a 67% completion percentage isn't the worst. Also a QBR rating of 101, but overall, he's not someone I love playing. And no one really gets too excited about watching Jared Goff play football, but since this is a showdown slate, I will have interest in the flex spot. Captain spot's a bit iffy there, especially at his price point, but obviously I'm going to have some interest in Jared Goff here. And if you're playing cash games, I'd try to get both quarterbacks in as well. Nick Foles, $900. Again, not a very good matchup here versus the Rams. They are 11th DVOA versus the pass, and they're only allowing 19 DraftKings points per game to the position, which is 10th fewest in the league. 230 passing yards per game, and overall some kind of stiff numbers here from the Rams. And Nick Foles, he hasn't been great either. Only 219 passing yards per game, 1.5 passing touchdowns per game, a pick per game as well. Passing the ball more than Jared Goff, but only a yards per attempt of 5.8 this season, which is pretty bad, and only an 80 QBR rating. Now, he's got one of the better wide receivers in football, Allen Robinson, throw the ball too, which always helps, but overall, I'm not super excited about what we're going to see from Nick Foles here. Now, I like the price point of only $9,800, and since this is a showdown slate, I will have interest in the flex spot, but really nothing more than that. All right, moving on to the running back position, I feel like it's pretty easy to break this down this week for this showdown slate. I think you play David Montgomery, and then I think you just move on from the position, especially if you're playing in cash games or if you're just putting one lineup, because I don't really want to mess with this trio of the Rams running backs. It could be really any of these guys that gets the majority of the touches. I think it's most likely that it's Henderson, and DraftKings has a price that way at $8,200. Malcolm Brown's at $3,400, and Cam Akers is at $1,000. But it could really be anybody here, and I just feel like it's a situation I want to avoid for the most part in tournaments. Yeah, I'd like to get exposure to one of these guys, or even all three of these guys, because I feel like one of them will pop off. But it's kind of a guessing game as to who it's going to be. I think it's most likely going to be Henderson, but again, things can change. Sean McVay said he wanted to get Cam Akers more involved last week, and then he got one snap, so I mean, it's kind of just a guessing game here. I like the price of Akers, and if he gets a handful of touches at $1,000, I think he can pay off his price point. But again, it's a bit of a guessing game here. It's going to be hard to trust, especially after only getting one snap last week. But before I go too deep into this, let's talk about David Montgomery, who I would say is one of my more favorite plays on these slate. You can run on this Rams defense. They are 21st DVOA versus the run. Now, they're not giving up a ton of DraftKings points per game, But still, it's a beatable run defense, and David Montgomery is going to handle the majority of these touches in the Chicago offense. No Tariq Cohen, so he's been handling pass-catching duties as well. And his pass-catching numbers have gone up the past 3 weeks, and that's what's giving him a decently high floor. Now, he's not putting up a huge fantasy performance each and every single week. Like, he's been absolutely abysmal in the rushing game so far. Like, I'll just read off his game log really quick for his rushing yards per game. We'll start with week 3 versus Atlanta. So he had 45 rushing yards, 27, 29, and 58, and he had double-digit rushing attempts each and every single week. So, yeah, he's not been able to get much going on the ground, but his targets have been up, which is what I love to see out of my running backs. 6 targets 3 weeks ago, then 8 targets, then 5 targets. And he's been scoring double-digit points each the past 3 weeks, which is, it's fine. $8,400 does seem a bit steep, but if he's going to get me around 15 to 20 touches, he's not going to split the workload with anybody. There's no Tariq Cohen that we have to worry about. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of David Montgomery on this slate. You know the volume's going to be there, and that's not something you can say with any of the Rams running backs. Do I think it's going to be Henderson? Yes, but it could easily be Malcolm Brown. It could also randomly be Cam Akers as well. So we can trust David Montgomery here. It might not be the prettiest performance in the world, but 15 to 20 touches is going to get me there on a showdown slate. I will always take the volume play every single time. So I like Montgomery. The Rams running backs, you can probably avoid them if you're bidding one lineup, or if you're bidding maybe 2 or 3. If you're bidding 150, yeah, you're going to want exposure to each of these guys because I think one of them can pop off for sure. But the matchup does kind of suck versus Chicago as well. I mean, if you're looking at Chicago's numbers versus the run so far this season. 11th DVOA, allowing the 9th fewest points per game. About 100 rushing yards per game. But again, this is going to be a bit of a split here. Henderson, he's averaging 12 rushing attempts per game. Malcolm Brown's at nearly 10. Cam Akers is at 6.5. So it's bit of a mixed bag here, and I think it's a situation that's probably best avoided for the most part, especially if you're building one lineup. So that means we'll move on to the wide receiver position now. And up top, we have Allen Robinson, $10,000. He's a bit pricey, but we know the volume's going to be there for him each and every single week. He hasn't had less than 9 targets in a game so far this season. 2 weeks ago, we saw 16 targets, and that's just kind of the upside that Allen Robinson has. Now, his quarterback play, it's always been a bit of an issue in his career, but he's got strong numbers so far. About 11 targets per game, a 28% target share, 33% market share of the team's air yards, and only 79 receiving yards per game. And again, quarterback play is a bit of an issue here. And I know early on in the Thursday Night Football game, I remember watching that game, Nick Foles it was not pretty to start. In this matchup versus the Rams, it's not very good. They're actually allowing the 2nd fewest points per game to the position at 28.4 points only. And their 11th DVA versus the pass. So the matchup isn't great here for either team. I mean, the Bears are allowing the 3rd fewest points per game to the position. So both matchups sucks for whatever team you're looking at here. But we're going to be forced to play these guys. And again, showdown slate. If this was a main slate, I'd probably be avoiding this game for the most part. I mean only a 45-point over-under doesn't get me too excited. But it's really hard to pass up the volume that Allen Robinson offers us on a showdown slate. So if you got the money for him, I like him a lot. He's got plenty of upside. He's a very talented wide receiver. Volume super, super high. So, yeah, I like him. It's just a matter of being able to afford him. Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods. I think that's a bit of a coin flip here. They're kind of similar plays pretty much each and every single week. Robert Woods has been very consistent this season, but, I mean, like I said, very similar numbers this season. Both averaging around 60 receiving yards per game. Both getting about 5 catches per game. Kupp's getting a little bit more targets, 7 targets per game compared to Robert Woods' 6. Robert Woods is scoring more, and they both have target shares in the low, mid-20s here. Both have similar weighted opportunity shares. Both have around 25% market share of the team's air yards. The ADOTs are similar. Robert Woods is slightly higher, but overall, these are pretty similar players for the most part. If I had to choose my favorite, I would say Woods over Kupp, but again, it's kind of just splitting hairs there, and I would just go with whatever you prefer the most. I like Woods just because he's just a little bit cheaper, and I feel like I can trust him more. And I don't have any numbers to back this up or anything, but I just feel like Robert Woods plays well in primetime slates. If someone knows that off the top of their head, you can let me know, but I feel like anytime it's a primetime game, Robert Woods typically plays well. Again, I have nothing to back that up with, but just from games I can remember off the top of my head, well, Woods does tend to play well, I'm pretty sure. So, again, both these plays are fine, just I prefer Woods there. And then after these 3 guys, Robinson, Kupp, and Woods are getting into the secondary pass-catching options in these offenses, which definitely aren't super exciting. We'll start with Mooney at $4,400. Maybe a bit pricey, but it's fine. I mean, he's on the field. He's going to get targets each and every single week. Around 5 targets per game, which isn't terrible. 12% target share, 8 out of 12.6, 32 receiving yards per game. Not strong numbers, and again, it's a really tough matchup versus the Rams. But if you can't get all the way up to Robinson, I think Mooney is okay at about half the price tag, but it's nothing exciting. And none of these guys that we're about to talk about are going to be very exciting. I mean, they're secondary options for a reason. Josh Reynolds, 2,800. He's actually coming off a decent game where he had 2 catches, around 45, 50 yards with a touchdown, actually, which is a solid game for him. And I actually do have some interest in him as a value play because he tends to get targets in most weeks, which is good enough for me, especially on a showdown slate. Now, the numbers aren't going to be too impressive, only 3.5 targets per game, a little bit over 2 catches per game, and only 11% target share in this offense. But he does have the higher ADOT of Woods or Kupp. I mean, ADOT of 13.1 is not terrible, but again, these aren't spectacular numbers, and it's a tough matchup versus Chicago. But at $2,800, I definitely think he's a pretty strong salary relief option on this slate. Anthony Miller, 2,200, kind of a similar play. He's only getting around 4.5 targets per game, 11% target share, 8 out of 11.8. Again, none of these guys you can really rely on. You're just hoping they just happen to have one of their good games, but it's nothing we can really bank on for the most part. But he's a fine salary relief option, and that's about as far as I can go. Cordell Patterson at 1,400. He's more of a gadget player. He'll get a couple of rushing attempts, maybe get a target or two, but only a 3% target share in this offense. 53 air yards in the season, 8 out of 5.9. You can't really expect much here out of Patterson. Van Jefferson, $800. I think he's worthy of a dart play at $800, but you can't expect volume from him. Only a 3% target share in the season, 1.5 targets per game, 11 receiving yards per game. 14 receiving yards per game. I was looking at Patterson's numbers. I mean, it's something you can really bank on. He does have an 8 out of 13.6, which isn't bad, so maybe you just happen to hit on a big play, but outside of that, you really can't count on Jefferson. But $800 isn't that bad. I do think he's a worthy dart play, but can't go deeper than that. Ted Ginn Jr., 600, kind of a similar play that Jefferson is on the Rams, only he's on the Bears. He could maybe hit a big play here, but the numbers are pretty weak for Ted Ginn so far this season. He's only seeing a target per game, doesn't even have a catch per game. Has an 8 out of 20.2, but only 8 receiving yards per game. So again, he's a pump play, but that's all he is. I mean, a target share of less than 3% on this offense. And Wims, he's the bare minimum at 200, but a 2% target share, not even seeing a target per game. These are just guys you really can't count on for the most part. Then move on to the tight end spot. Jimmy Graham, old man Jimmy Graham, $7,200. He's not having the worst season by any means, and he's kind of been consistent. 5.5 targets per game, 15% target share, 32% weighted opportunity share, 33 receiving yards per game. The numbers aren't pretty, but he has been scoring touchdowns, actually. Almost a receiving touchdown per game at 0.67 touchdowns. The matchup versus the Rams, if you're looking at their numbers, they've actually been kind of weak versus the tight end position. Really tough on wide receivers, but a little bit weak versus the tight end spot, which could end up working out well for Jimmy Graham. He's also got a pretty big tight end versus linebacker advantage matchup, according to PFF this weekend as well. But they're allowing 14.6 points per game to the position, which is 21st in the league. Although they are 11th DVA versus the pass, only allowing 48 receiving yards per game. But Jimmy Graham's not a terrible play. I wish he was a bit cheaper because it doesn't feel great spending over $7,000 for Jimmy Graham. But given the nature of this slate, I think he's viable. Tyler Higbee and Gerald Everett, these guys are going to split snaps for the most part. But I think the interesting thing is that Tyler Higbee actually hurt his hand, which could make me like Gerald Everett a little bit more here at a slightly lower price tag. Actually, around $1,400 cheaper. And the reason I say that is that maybe they use Higbee more as a blocker because, again, a hand injury, that's going to hurt your ability to catch the ball. He's expected to play. He actually is listed as questionable, but all signs say that he's going to play. But he could end up being used as a blocker more than a pass-catching option, and that's going to boost Gerald Everett up. And at only $4,800, I don't think that's the worst play in the world. And actually, Everett had a pretty strong game a couple of weeks ago, and at $4,800, tough matchup for Chicago, but I think he's worthy of a play, for sure. And then after Everett, it gets a bit messy here. We have Cole Kmet here at $1,800. He's the second tight end in this Bears offense, which doesn't get me too excited. He's not actually even seeing a target per game. He has scored. He does have an 8 out of 9.4, but only a 2% target share in this offense. You're kind of just hoping for a random touchdown, which he's done this season, but it's not something you can really bank on. Bit of a softer matchup here versus the Rams as they kind of struggle versus tight ends so far, but again, nothing we can really count on, really. Demetrius Harris, he's $400. And I guess he's somewhat playable. He's actually getting nearly 2 targets per game and has a 4% target share. But again, guys, this isn't volume that you can really count on most weeks. Then after that, I just wouldn't really play any of those guys. Then move on to the defense. or move on to the defenses. And the Rams and Bears, I think both these guys are actually playable, or teams are playable, because I don't expect a ton of fireworks in this game, and both quarterbacks are prone to making mistakes. I'd prefer the Rams over the Bears just because I like the Rams offense a bit better. Jared Goff, they do have the higher implied team total. You got Jared Goff, you got that trio of running backs, you got Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, you got the 2 decent tight ends, you got Reynolds, even Van Jefferson. So I'd rather use the Rams defense over the Bears, but the Bears have been a pretty solid defense this season. We've seen Jared Goff have some pretty sucky games in his career, although he does typically play better at home. I know it's a new stadium and everything, but these defenses are playable. They did price them up a bit compared to some other defenses on Showdown slates where there's more points expected to be scored, but I think they're viable. It's hard to put them in over a skill position player. It really is, because the upside is limited outside of a defensive touchdown, which are very rare. So they're playable. It's just I wish they were a bit cheaper. And the kickers, they are what they are. You have Sloman and Santos here. I mean, if they hit their field goals, they hit their field goals. I could see a lot of field goals being scored here. Both these defenses aren't elite, but they're not bad either. So that could mean the offenses could get drives going, but they kind of stall out in field goal range, and it could lead to a bunch of field goals. We're also going to be in a dome as well, so we don't have to worry about weather. But we really can't get too deep into kickers because it's just a matter if they hit their field goals or not. It's really hard to project that. But that's going to be it for this video, guys. I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure to leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate that. I'm going to get out of here. It's around 2:30 in the morning, so I got to get to bed. Hope you guys had a fantastic Sunday. I mean, that main slate was bonkers. I mean, what was the Millie Maker was probably over 260 points, wasn't it? I think I had around 225 fantasy points, which sounds amazing, but on this slate, it's not even as good as it really sounds. I mean, there was a ton of points scored. The cash line was pretty high this week. But yeah, really fun slate. A lot of good chalky guys went off, making it a really high scoring slate. So hopefully you guys had a fantastic week, and I'm going to get out of here. See you guys in the next one.